Welcome, everyone, to our presentation on being audit ready, not reactive. Automation, what? My name is Denise Miller. I'm a manager at Liberty Mutual in our Governance, Risk, and Compliance department. And with me today are my amazing colleagues. We have Leah Mongeon and Sheri LaCarbonara, who are solution specialists and lead the work of our regulatory assessment squad, responsible for delivery of regulatory, contractual, and security framework assessments at Liberty Mutual. As we walk you through our presentation, you will see how the work that we do is interconnected and moves our GRC organization at Liberty Mutual forward towards being audit ready. Before we begin, we want to start with a disclaimer from our friends Doug and Lemu. While we are highly skilled GRC professionals, we are not a professional services firm. We are not the QSAs. We implement these programs within our environment at Liberty Mutual. We only had one culture and one environment we're looking at. And this session will be focused on our journey, where we failed, the opportunities we experienced, where we pivoted along the way, and our lessons learned. So with that in mind, we ask that you buckle up and enjoy the ride as we take you from how we went from audit reactive to audit ready, of course, with automation at its core. Here is our overall agenda. We will go through what our session goals are, what our journey looked like, and what our suggestions are for 5 areas for you to look at to take away to automate at your own organizations. Let's talk session goals. What do we want you all to walk away with? The regulatory landscape continues to evolve. New regulations, updated regulations, each leader having their own ideas of what's the best security framework, coupled with contractual requirements. Thinking about all of these things is quite overwhelming if you're a merchant, as we are. The evolving nature of the work and our desires to protect our organizations and the data makes this work very stressful. One of our goals is to share what we are doing, how we're doing our best to keep pace with all of the growing requirements. I will talk more about these and how it ties to our controls library. Once we walk you through how we're keeping pace with the requirements, we will walk you through how we are evolving our assurance practice to look broadly across control sets, understand both our assurance and risk conclusions, and build out a repository to help us be audit ready, not reactive. And Leah will talk you through these items and how this requires a larger departmental effort. Lastly, the buzzword we all love, automation. What are we automating? How did we identify where to start? And what advice do we have for you all? And Sheri will share more about what our amazing engineers have helped us implement at Liberty Mutual. Last reminder, in our line of work, it's very easy to boil the ocean. As I'm sure you all know, we're here to tell you that we did not solve all of these things at once. It took time. Some of it's been through natural progression in our journey, and some have been due to our engineers helping us push the envelope on how we do our work at Liberty. These things take time, and we hope that this presentation gives you some nuggets that you can take away and build upon at your own organizations. Now I'll open it up to our first poll. Show of hands.
One more.
How many regulations, contractual requirements, or frameworks does your company leverage to drive your programs and compliance? Less than 5? Can't really see, but they were right. 5 to 10? Okay, I saw more hands that time. And more than 10? Wow, okay. So, looks as though many of you share our challenge we had at Liberty Mutual as a highly regulated company, and the challenge of keeping up with the demand of the regulatory landscape. So, talking about how we built our foundation. Early on in our journey towards building an assurance practice, we realized that we needed to understand what are all the drivers for the various requests we were getting. What are all the requirements? We began to build a framework within a tool, eGRC Archer, which many of you have probably heard of, to help the organization understand the drivers, the requirements, what control teams do to meet those requirements, and then test out those controls. I'll talk about what that framework looks like for us. We then determined what the authoritative sources are for our organization, These are different for every organization. For us, we chose PCI DSS, the New York DFS Cybersecurity Regulation, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, and there were more. A company may want to include their risk tolerance, privacy requirements. It could go on. It's what your organization feels is important and what collectively do you want to consider when building a control library that can be reused across regulations and requirements? And what collectively do you want to communicate throughout your organization that needs to be met from a cybersecurity control perspective? So how did we identify the frameworks and regs at Liberty Mutual? For us, this was a meeting with our senior leaders. But depending on the company, you may want board of directors involvement or others involved as well in that conversation. That group then identified what they believed to be the authoritative sources, and this will be critical as you progress. In order to make an impact to your organization, you first need to understand which frameworks your leaders feel are important. Authoritative sources are the why. Why do we need these controls? Our next step was to document the cybersecurity policies and standards. These are the what. What do we do, and then how do they align to those authoritative sources? We then began an ongoing effort to document our control procedures, and these are the who and the how. How do we do it, and who does it? With this, we began building out our control procedure library within Archer. In parallel, as the control procedure library was being populated, teams began mapping in their requirements into that library. We began to leverage a centralized evidence repository to centrally store evidence collected per control procedure so that we could reuse it across authoritative sources. It was really at that point that we began to see the holistic picture of our environment that we had been seeking. For example, we could see for every control what was performed, who performed it, and what was the authoritative source that it aligned to. So if there was a control, process, or procedure change, we could quickly see the impact across all of our regulations, contractual requirements, and security frameworks. Now Leah will share more about how we're keeping pace.
Great. Thank you, Denise. So enabling reuse and automation, we could see all the drivers behind control and better communicate the value of the work to our control performers. We began to identify opportunities to reduce touch points and reuse evidence across assessments. We found ways to streamline and automate processes created by our control governance team throughout the process. On this slide are some examples where we are doing for new and existing through periodic control validations, authoritative source reviews, and additions, continuing to build our library and harmonize our controls as much as possible, and making it as easily consumable, keeping our consumer top of mind for frequent feedback loops, and automating manual pieces throughout the process, and creating workflows for assurance tasks such as regular policies, control, and process validations and evidence requests. All of this enabling us to move faster to meet regulatory demands. We are doing our best to keep pace in an ever-changing and ever-growing regulatory landscape. Our journey towards effectiveness testing, standardizing assurance practices is ongoing. We strive to automate these processes to improve efficiency. Sorry about that. These are all the examples that I was just discussing. Sorry about that. So next, we're going to do a poll. So how many are you prepared prior to a regulator coming on site and have a package of materials ready to go? So first, I am ready to go day one. Show of hands. Right? I need a request list, and then I'm able to collect evidence to start meetings. Great. Very impressive. And then last, I'm not sure. Okay. So it was great to see how many of you answered, so thank you for that. We understand the importance for thorough preparation before an auditor comes on site. However, we often find ourselves waiting for request lists, waiting to schedule meetings, and questionnaires to kick off all the work. This results in a scramble to collect the evidence, provide accurate answers, and to reach out to our stakeholders to get data every time we go for a new assessment. While we haven't completely perfected this process, we're committed to continuously improving part of this ongoing journey. So next, I'm going to share with you the controls that we have made to get us ready. So for controls, we have implemented validation reviews for control and processes. As part of this, we are notified in advance when there's a people, process, or technology change. This enabled us to modify any downstream impacts that could impact test plans or evidence collection. In parallel requests, we looked across our internal and external assessment programs and worked to identify where we can better align to assurance-related programs to enable us to request once and satisfy many. We know that not every program will allow for this, but when we can do it, we try. We review this about every 6 months to determine if there's any changes that we can make. And lastly, for evidence, we have implemented an evidence repository that is linked to our controls, enabling each program to have access to evidence already collected as part of a previous request to determine reuse opportunities across all of our programs. This also allows us to be prepared when auditors are coming on site. We can look at a program control set prior to an audit or reviewer and determine if we have already gathered the evidence. This way, on day one, we can provide process narratives, alignments to controls, and control evidence documentation. And yes, there are times that we still will need to meet with our control owners, but where possible. And I will now hand it over to Sheri, who is going to talk us through the work that she did with our automation team for the PCI scope validations.
Thanks, Leah. So there's a great quote up there. There's a better way to, oh, I don't need that
Sorry.
one. That's all right. There's a way to do it better. We got to find it, and that's what we did, right? So I'm going to highlight some examples of where automation has helped our teams. Control testing sometimes can be painful, am I right? If it seems insane, you should probably rethink how you're doing it. Have the mindset for automation, be open to it. We are lucky to have a full stack development team who utilizes custom software to elevate our control testing. They focused on digitizing our mundane processes so we can focus on delivering higher value work where we can achieve that state of proactive versus reactive auditing. I'm going to highlight some more examples with the control testing, and then we'll go into scope manager. But although control testing can be tedious, these processes are necessary. There was someone on our financial controls team who spent 100 hours manual testing. 100 hours for one person. After all that time, you have to think there's got to be a better way to achieve what we need to do. Scope manager. What's the first step in any assessment? We have to define the scope. And so this tool takes asset information from our CMDB and pulls it in so our SMEs can validate the applications and assets in scope for any of our programs. Once for financial control testing, there are over 100 applications in scope for our financial controls. And then for PCI compliance, we have about 25 technologies in scope for PCI assessment. There are 25 SMEs that we work with. So before moving to Scope Manager, we would send out spreadsheets to 75 people. You get a spreadsheet, you get a spreadsheet. Consolidate all their responses back into one master file, and no issues were done there. There were no errors, nothing missed at all. I'm kidding, but the move to Scope Manager has streamlined this process and maintenance of our scope to various programs, as well as limiting those manual updates and minimizing those handoffs between our SMEs, our GRC teams, and sometimes our hardware asset management team. The timing of the PCI asset validation to Scope Manager came when our organization was retiring the system of record. But now, using Scope Manager, we can manage the scope for multiple programs in one tool. We can schedule scoping rounds before an assessment kicks off. The SME will get an automated email and a link to complete their validation exercise. They will also get past due notices if they're not finishing in a timely manner. We can have a dashboard in place that shows what's outstanding, what's been completed, and what needs GRC review. All great for metrics. Feedback from our PCI SMEs was that it was great visibility to seeing what was in scope. They could easily add assets that we were missing, Or they could inform us of assets that were coming out of scope, but more importantly, tell us why they felt that way. In the very near future, Scope Manager will feed our organization's new CMDB system via an API, and this will help our threat and vulnerability management team know which assets to scan and for which programs. It will also help to identify if our logging team gets an alert of a logging failure, to assign that criticality to that asset. We believe these changes have greatly contributed to one of our strategic initiatives to digitizing our future, thus improving our overall cybersecurity posture. Now I'll turn it back over to Leah, who will speak more about our control testing and the automation that we put through for that.
Great. Thanks, Sheri. So while the vision of improving our processes may seem ideal and straightforward, the question arises, how do we actually achieve it? Within our own group, it's been a transformational process, continues to gain momentum as people recognize the value. We've reached a point where simply adding more people to address the ever-increasing scope from regulators is no longer a sustainable solution. To create waves of change and gain buy-in, we've learned to start small is key. By identifying areas where we can improve processes, such as testing our data and reconciliation through small measures, we can make significant progress. This may involve leveraging our network to engage developers who can provide assistance. Simple steps like creating a batch script to aggregate data into a file instead of relying on hundreds of screenshots can have a considerable impact. Once you can demonstrate the value of these improvements to your teams and stakeholders, you can unlock the potential of collaborating with developer teams. It's important to recognize that technology, particularly AI, should not be feared but embraced. By leveraging technology, you can become more efficient, agile, and resilient. However, we must always remember to harness our social skills that are irreplaceable by technology. By using technology to create a space for these skills, we can redefine how we operate in this new world and achieve greater success. So in this picture above, you can see that this is our journey and where we brought you from the authoritative sources to assessment automation. As you can see, our journey isn't over, as our peak is when we reach continuous and compliant state and able to hand over all the necessary documentation upon an auditor entering our environment. To achieve a continuous compliance and be audit ready with data-driven insights into your control state, we had worked with our internal and data analytics team, who provides a cybersecurity data warehouse to support cybersecurity insights, to report content, and to meet integration of analytics needs for our global cybersecurity teams, along with providing operational KPIs, annual goals to help leadership and control owners and assessment teams stay aligned. Before we finish, we wanted to share the 5 areas we recommended starting to automate in order to get into an audit-ready state. So policy and standard reviews and approvals, as well as process and control validations. We have been able to automate the review cycle for all of these efforts to capture approvals within a tool. Automation has been implemented with email notifications to capturing edits and sign-offs. This has helped us eliminate manual efforts that used to be via spreadsheets, emails, and Word documents. Evidence request, collection, and review. This not only removed manual efforts on requesting, organizing the data by control, but it also enabled us to reuse across multiple programs that leverage the same control content. Program scope details. As you all know, program scope is everything. We built a tool to pull in data already collected from existing systems with the ability to collect additional data that support our testing efforts. We used to collect this data manually multiple times a year, in having an individual perform significant Q&A reviews. As you can imagine, this was not ideal. And last, look to automate controls that rely on systems with data insights. For example, controls that leverage the ticketing system that have data already available and sources can easily consume. Thank you all for your time today. We're happy to answer any questions after the session. Thank you.